Hi, I'm Julianne Donahue,
I'm Sophie Kalo.
I'm Brittany Vincent.
And I'm Lindsay Rivas.
and we looked at Maurice Sendak. So, what did you guys think?
Okay, so some of the things that I saw that make this author / illustrator distinctive were definitely the color scheme. In all of his books, he kind of sticks to more dull colors like blue and yellow and some green. Most of his books have more of like a poem feel, and less of like how a classic storybook would go, where it like is paragraph by paragraph. So that was one thing that I noticed.
Yeah, there were a lot of like literary devices, like a lot of alliteration, and it did have like a little poemy feel, almost like Dr. Seuss kind of. But I don't know that he used, I think, a little bit more of adult words maybe than Dr. Seuss.
More advanced, yeah.
Yeah, my book had a lot of alliteration too. It's the alphabet book, and on each page it has alliteration throughout the whole book, and it's a very educational book for learning the alphabet and seeing the actions being done throughout the book.
I also think, like, as he went further into his career, his ideas and his books kind of got a little bit darker, and that's when he became a little bit more controversial. And I think we talked about earlier how it kind of related to George, the book that we read earlier.
Yeah, definitely with the controversial issues. It was just like he brought them up a lot earlier in time, so it was like kind of less accepted.
It started with his book, Where the Wild Things Are, and We Are All in the Dumps with Jack and Guy, versus these 4 books were all
educational.
Not controversial in any way, but as he started writing more books, he started to get more controversial and had kind of a gloomier, darker side to his writing.
Well, I think when we researched Maurice too, like, he kind of had a rougher childhood, and
he was very sickly. A sickly
like, we
child.
were looking at quotes, and he was talking about how he tried to relate how he felt as a child, and tried to convey that in his illustrations, which is why they were darker, and how his like writing got a little bit darker and a bit more jumbled later on.
Which also relates really good to George by Alex Gino, just because like that was kind of his way of reflecting his childhood by writing that. So we found that connection was like really strong. Actually, when he was a child, I don't remember where I wrote it. His parents were Holocaust survivors, and he was actually gay, so that had a big effect on his child. One of his books that was considered extremely controversial was actually We Are All in the Dumps with Jack and Guy is what it's called. And in that book, he actually talked about 2 boys, and he didn't specifically say that they were gay for each other, but some of the illustrations were very telling, and he actually explained later that one of the boys was his dead brother, and the other was his old lover. So that was very kind of dark and telling of how his childhood went.
And I think that book came out in the 70s, whereas George is a more recent book, and for a topic like that to be presented in children's literature at that time is extremely controversial, and no one was really doing that. There's no other children's books that were that dark and twisted. Like in that book, there were kids being kidnapped and just a lot of dark stuff that you wouldn't typically want a child to be exposed to, in my opinion.
Well, I think that brings up like a really interesting question about like what is like children's literature and like what should be brought up in children's literature. And I feel like the controversial I say in quotes topics, like that can be brought up pretty much anywhere, but I think the reason maybe a lot of people found it so controversial, not just the topic, was how it was presented. It's so dark, and I mean, for little kids, maybe they don't understand the kind of symbolism that's going on there, and like why this book is so scary. And
well, Maurice did his books in the perspective of him as a child, and I don't think his parents were very I guess, expressive
Yeah.
with what he should be reading, what he should be drawing.
Mhm.
And as a sick kid, I mean, he didn't know any better.
Yeah.
So with his books that were in 1962, they're more educational. They aren't controversial.
They
And
have a
then
good message.
Yeah,
Yes.
this is like one of the ones that she's referring to. This is called Chicken with Rice, and it like actually goes through the months of the year, and like another one that we read, the one that Sophie was talking about, is the alphabet. So that's also like very educational, and like then it moves on to more so like what we said already, like the dark ones that are less educational and more so like expressing how he felt as a child. For an example, most of you probably know Where the Wild Things Are. He actually wrote that later on in his career, and that kind of was a telltale of how him and his parents interacted. So that was kind of sad just to hear like that's what led him to writing about things like that.
well, that book in particular had a lot of controversy. There was a a children's psychologist that said how the way that the boy, or Maurice, because he was writing about himself, how children shouldn't talk to their parents that way. And with him being sick, I think his parents just didn't, not that they didn't care, but they didn't give him the attention or discipline that he should have received.
I think also his parents being Holocaust survivors, they had already been through so much that maybe they didn't have like the time or the emotions to be able to like love a child how a child should be loved.
And be supportive, yeah.
Mhm.
I agree.
I just think it's really interesting like switching gears a little bit, how he, like, obviously, like, these 4 books that we have, like, every single one of these is educational, and he kind of talked about how, like, he didn't really like the super magical and mystical and all that, but it has a lot of those elements for the purpose of education. Like, the entire point of the magical storyline is to have, like, you know, like an educational ending. Like in Pierre, the ending, I don't know if you can read that last sentence, but it says the moral of Pierre is care, and how that transferred from like using magic to be educational into like Where the Wild Things Are, where it's like magic, and it's sometimes like there isn't really a point, like you don't know, like in the book you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. We Are All in the Dumps with Jack and Guy.
Yeah, like it's a little bit harder to find a clear like moral of the story.
Same with this book. It's called In the Night Kitchen, and I think this one was published in the 70s. 63, yeah. And then, no, 70. And this book was very much like a fantasy book, but still rooted in reality. It's about a boy's dreams at night, and it's very strange. He gets like baked into bread, and the bread turns into an airplane. It's very much a fantasy fairy tale book, but with kind of a darker, gloomy aspect as well, continuing with the theme of the other books, because it's not just like a happy child going through the sky.
Right.
He's like scared at times.
I think in the beginning, like we've been saying, he has a clear message of what he's trying to get across.
Yeah,
And
each
then
one definitely has a lesson involved. Yeah.
But then as he gets further and further in his children's books, they're losing that focus. Like he has this pent up emotion that he needs to get out, and we might not get it because we're reading from an adult perspective, and he's still stuck in that childhood mind where it makes sense to him, but we don't understand it.
Yeah. Well, I think like most children also can't relate to maybe what he went through.
Right, yeah.
Like his parents were Holocaust survivors, you know, like
He was sickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so maybe like a lot of kids just can't relate and be like, oh yes, this is exactly how I'm feeling, which may be why also it might be a little bit more controversial, is because not a lot of people can, you know, relate to his
to that.
story. You know.
Yeah. What genre do you guys think these books would fit into? Or like his style of writing?
I definitely think, like how I mentioned already, like in the beginning it was very educational, and like each of them had a life lesson, and like there was a purpose behind all of them. And then like towards the end it definitely moved more to like dark and gloomy, and like I don't know what genre you would consider that, but
Well, it's definitely like make-believe fiction
Yeah,
across
yes.
the board.
yeah.
But I think
His books were almost too dark for the audience that he was writing for.
mhm.
As he got
As
more
he
into his
got
career,
more,
yeah.
like these, like the colors they're pretty set. Like you know exactly, the colors stay the same in every single page. They don't change. But then
For all four of
for
this,
all
it's
four-
a series.
Yeah.
I
for
think
the
these
series.
are more of a series,
But
and
then,
they
like-
all have like the
So,
blue
like-
yellow
Yeah.
coloring.
And a hint of green in like all of them. You can notice that
I'll
like
maybe go up.
all of the illustrations are like stuck with the same color and kind of on that
Yeah.
long. It's not along the same line with the illustrations. Like most of them are like very minimalistic. Like I don't know, this
Yeah,
one
bring it up.
like doesn't have a background and it's like I don't know if I'm
Just
reading
more
too far
simple.
into it, but
it's
like
simple.
maybe like
Mhm.
he's reflecting how like he had a lack of like background and
Hmm.
like there were things that were missing possibly in his life and like also in his writing.
I think maybe it just shows him like evolving as an author illustrator because you
Mhm.
see like this one. I mean, it's just like white backgrounds for all of these. Like, there's
Mhm.
nothing
This one
really
was written later.
super intense. And I mean, like, if you look at this,
They're very detailed.
every part of this is colored in and like
And they're darker colors.
yeah, yeah,
They're
yeah,
not
yeah.
as
They're
bright.
moody or gloomy colors, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that shows more of his like evolution,
Mm-hmm.
like maybe getting more comfortable writing and you know maybe using that as an outlet to you know like maybe think through all the stuff he's been through.
Well, and it could be possible maybe his parents didn't make much money, so he wasn't able to buy those rich, dark colors.
Mhm.
Versus
Yeah.
here,
Hmm.
I mean, we're just using yellows, light greens.
Simplistic. Yeah.
yeah,
So maybe
That's
as he published more books and he was able to make more money, he
Mhm.
was able to buy those rich colors.
Do you guys have like any big takeaways from the author or like any big lessons that you think you took away from his writing or illustrations?
I think it kind of solidified my own opinion on what I think children's literature is. Like, I think his later books are super interesting and maybe like, you know, fun to read as not like as a young child.
Right.
But I always thought of children like the best children's books were the ones that had like life lessons at the end, or maybe like a little moral, like moral
Mhm.
story, yeah.
Mhm.
And this kind of like reading these 4 books that kind of had a moral to it. That made me think like, oh yes, I feel like as a child I would have loved this. It made me think, yes, this is what I think peak children's literature is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like all 4 of this series, like
Mhm.
I babysit all the time, and I think these books would be perfect for a younger kid just getting started with books because they're extremely educational and they're just simple, easy to understand. Whereas his older books, maybe later in elementary school, because there's more to like wrap your head around.
more
with
depth.
those. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
That might be definitely harder to understand for like a younger child to understand.
Well, most children's books that I read, at least, they were about love and family,
Mhm.
and these ones went outside. Like
Mhm.
they went on a more, like not everything is rainbows and hearts,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
which
true.
which is a nice perspective, but I wouldn't like for this book in particular. This one, oops, I don't think I'd read to my kids.
Me.
Maybe not at like
not
such
right
a
away.
young age where
Yeah.
like you could read this to like a toddler.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I wouldn't
It's
read
very appropriate.
Yes, that
Yeah.
one would be later on when they're a little bit older.
Yeah.
Totally shifting gears. Some of the what am I trying to say? Like awards and like things that he got noticed for. He actually got the Children's Lit Legacy Award, which has to do with like authors that are just recognized for their work, and he also got the Caldecott Medal, which he actually got for Where the Wild Things Are. What else did he get?
I thought he got some like lifetime kind of situation.
Oh, he got an award for his illustration, the Hans Christian Andersen Award.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then just a few other small ones, but So he was definitely, although like his books were like super controversial and such, like he was definitely like recognized for his work and like for being a good author and illustrator on both sides. So I thought that was like something important to mention, because even though people like saw his books as so like dark and like controversial, he was still
reading them.
Right. Yeah, people are still reading them enough to, like, for him to be
I
recognized.
just think like everyone knows what Where the Wild Things Are. That's such a popular story.
Mm-hmm.
Which way back when it first came out, it was huge with, kids shouldn't talk to their parents that way.
And it was
But yet-
seen as harmful.
Yes, but now in our day and age, I was read that book when I was a child. Like my younger brothers were read.
Mm-hmm.
So even though there was all of this controversy, it's still huge. And I don't think people really talk about the controversy. Or at least I haven't heard anything
Yeah.
since.
I hadn't either until we looked into it.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So.
that's all I
I
have.
think that's all we got.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you guys
Thank
for
you
watching.
for-
Thank you.
Bye.